The first one was tiny. It was Truro, Truro, and there's a tiny high school there where I spent my first semester. The high school was called Interstate 35. I don't even remember the mascot. So that was the first time. And the town, Truro, had one Phillips gas station where we hung out, and that's it. I think a population of less than 200.
The startup investment landscape is changing, and world-class companies are being built outside of Silicon Valley. We find them, talk with them, and discuss the upside of investing in them. Welcome to Upside.
Woo! Hello, and welcome to the Upside Podcast, the first podcast finding upside outside of Silicon Valley. I'm Eric Hornung, and I'm accompanied by my co-host, Mr. Concert Series himself, Jay Klaus. Jay, how's it going, man?
I see you're admiring the new additions to my apartment wall here.
I am. The last time I was there, you only had one poster up. Now there are 5. If I'm counting correctly, that looks like 5.
That is correct. So for the listeners, something that I wanted to do with my co-working space here in Columbus was get some music in there. I used to live in a house with several musicians. We used to do concerts in our living room. It was a blast. It was one of my favorite things. I wanted more of that in my life, and so I convinced the co-working space to let us put a concert series on. Went out, raised some sponsorship, helped book the bands, and we had 5 concerts over 5 months here in Columbus. We had different graphic artists do a poster for every show. And so here on my wall has a trophy, per se, is a poster from each of those shows. And I'm very stoked about it. I've had this one bare wall in my apartment for probably over a year. Actually, the whole time I've been here, so over 2 years. And now it's beautiful.
I love that. I love the idea of like bringing music to somewhere that is inherently creative. I never got to attend a Wyandotte session, which is what the name of the concert series at Jay's old house was.
I missed that, actually, and you can still find it buried in the YouTubes. If you search Wyandotte Sessions on YouTube, you can find some of the session recordings we did of local artists who just played a song for us. And we did pretty high-quality video. Shout out to Ian Hoyt on that. Really, really good stuff. I still listen to those probably pretty frequently, actually, especially the Scott Baldwin one. Big fan of the Scott Baldwin Wyandotte session.
It's cool. Have you ever heard of the gondola sessions in Aspen?
No, tell me more.
I actually don't know if that's exactly what it's called, but...
That's like the chair lift?
It's like a chair lift in Aspen, but they do it during the summer, and they just kind of put an artist in there, and they just go at it acoustic up the chairlift. So they usually do 2 songs or so. One of them is Nako Bear, who I'm a big fan of. Nako Bear and Medicine for the People, shout out. And it was just like incredible. But they have a lot of like really good artists in Aspen. I don't know if the series is continued because I haven't seen any new ones in a long time, but it was a very cool idea.
Is it shot from like a gondola behind it or like in front of it, I guess you would say, also traveling up the path?
No, it's in the gondola. So gondolas are pretty big, so it's not like just a little thing, but the camera's on one side and I'm guessing a production crew, and then the people are playing on the other side of the gondola, and it's just acoustic and raw and very cool.
Man, it's cool. I love the internet and I love YouTube. I'm getting way more into the culture of YouTube and the niche communities that exist there. There's a member of Unreal that really, really knows his YouTube stuff, and he's taught me a lot, and it's been fascinating to dig into that.
Do you have a customized YouTube URL yet?
I do.
You made it.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. YouTube.com/C/JKlaus.
/C/JKlaus. Got it.
Yeah, I think C is just like the channel demarcation.
Got it. Well, enough about music and your taste in music, my taste in music. Let's get into the guest today. Jay, who are we talking to?
Today, we're speaking with Bek Abdullayev. He is the founder and CEO of Super Dispatch. Super Dispatch is a platform that enables automotive logistics companies to eliminate paperwork, manage loads, drivers, and billing all in one place. Founded in 2013, based in Kansas City, Missouri, we were tipped off to Super Dispatch by John Fine of Firebrand Ventures. They've gone through the Techstars Sprint Accelerator, and they've received $1.5 million in funding to this point.
And on my first kind of glance at Super Dispatch, it feels like it's in the vein of Lawn Guru and Set Scouter. Would you agree with that?
Closer to Lawn Guru than Set Scouter, I think. To me, it seems like, and they have 5,000 carriers using the platform. So to me, their users are these carriers, these carriers have fleets of vehicles that go and help haul you might think of like if your car breaks down, you need a wrecker or you need a hauler. These trucks come, they pick up your vehicle, and they take it to the destination. And so Super Dispatch, from what I understand, is a mobile application, a software platform that the hauler can quickly run some of the information he needs, which is usually done in paperwork, getting the VIN number off your vehicle, taking stock of any damage that's done to the vehicle, getting information about the driver, then hauling it to the destination where you meet the driver and the driver signs off on all of that. All of that is now automated through the Super Dispatch app as opposed to paperwork that would go back to the carrier.
Right. It's kind of increasing operational efficiencies throughout like the lifespan of one transaction for these carriers.
I don't think it's like matchmaking for people who need the service. I think it's much more just a back office tool for the carriers in their haulers.
Okay, so I was a little bit off on that marketplace read on my end.
But man, something that I've just heard anecdotally is logistics space is huge. When people talk about automation taking jobs or about driverless vehicles being a huge threat, the first thing they go to is talking about the logistics industry. And this is a statistic I found. Interested to hear if you found a market size. The trucking industry, as I found it, is a $700 billion industry.
So I actually worked at a trucking company. They manufactured truck brakes. I worked for them in Cleveland, Ohio, and it is amazing. Actually, let me give a little insight into what I did there. I worked in our internal mergers and acquisitions department. So the idea was we look around the marketplace, figure out who we want to buy, raise that to the board. They put together the financing, all of that. So in my internship doing that, I created kind of this master database of all kinds of people who were in truck manufacturing and anything related to that. It is insane how many billion-dollar companies there are in this space that you've never heard of. You've never heard of them. I've never heard of them. Like, I was blown away by these companies that were in like Sheffield, Ohio, and just these random little places that were doing like $1 billion because of the monstrosity that is the trucking and automobile space.
Never heard of Sheffield, Ohio.
It is west of Cleveland in Lorain County. There's Sheffield Lake. It's close to Elyria and Lorain, if you've heard of any of those.
I was telling Eric off air, this platform reminds me of a project that I've been pretty close to over the past couple of years. Friend and client of mine has a pool service company. He created software so that his pool service company could run more efficiently and get out of a paperwork world. Realized that everyone else in that world was still using paperwork and is now killing it, selling it to those companies. And this is a very similar model to me, which is attractive. It's a SaaS model. Supposedly, from an article that I read, Bek believes that he can save the trucking industry $16.4 billion annually.
So you have a little bit of insight from, you said friend and client. I'm guessing that means you have insight into the upside, but you also have insight into some of the shadows. What are those in this general business model and specifically for dispatch from you?
Mostly behavioral change, because anything that's still running on paper in 2018 has some deeply entrenched baggage and behavior from people who probably resist technology a little bit. Secondarily, usually people in this space are spending so much time doing it, even taking the time to learn a new technology that is software is a scary, threatening thing, and they don't want to do it because their days are so full of doing the paperwork thing. It's kind of a weird catch-22. So it's about getting in front of them and making them see the product and trust that it works. The guy I was mentioning, his best sales trick was doing a full demo for them, giving them a free trial, and once they were on it, it just started billing automatically after a period of a couple of months. And it seems that Super Dispatch over the years has been catching some fire. Article I read in January of 2018 in the Startland News said revenue grew 10 times more in 2016 than in 2015. And in 2017, their revenues increased 300% from 2016. And Beck had a quote that said that puts us at a huge milestone of crossing 7 figures.
That's pretty cool. That's a really interesting way to refer to revenue growth. It went 10x then 300x, but
that is strange, yeah.
Without any like underlying base assumption, if it's $1,000, 10x is $10,000, then 300x on that is $3 million. So is that what it was? Or, that would be crossing the 7 figures. So I'm not really sure what that means from a actual number standpoint, but that's probably the weirdest way I've heard revenue referred to over like a multi-year time frame.
Shout out to the Startland News.
Yeah, shout out to Startland News, who we heard about from John Fine.
Oh, you're right. He was talking about them as an aspect of their ecosystem that was kind of like a self-started media platform for startup companies.
Yeah, and he said that they are kind of the premier guys to go to in Kansas City. So nice find, Jay.
That's right. All right. Well, you ready to jump in and talk to Bek?
Let's do it.
Bek, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jay. Happy to be here.
So usually we like to start with the history of the founder, but I think this podcast, we got to kick it off with a visual for the listeners. We are all dressed in ethnic inspired clothing. Jay and I wearing clothes that are not inspired by our ethnicities, but you are wearing something pretty interesting. Can you elaborate, explain to the audience what you're wearing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm wearing a Super Dispatch t-shirt underneath, but over the t-shirt, I'm wearing this golden embroidered heavy coat. It's a traditional coat from Uzbek culture. It's called chupon. I believe it's used at a wedding. It's gifted to the groom at the wedding. It's a very ceremonial, shiny coat.
So it was not from your wedding?
No, it's not from my. But the funny thing about these coats is that I now have about 6 of them, because every time we have guests from Uzbekistan, they keep gifting us these coats, and we keep accepting them kindly without, and then we just put them in the pile of the other coats in the closet. There's no practical use for these other than the weddings.
That almost sounds to me as if, like, after the wedding, I were to take off my wedding ring and then give it to somebody that I stayed at their home. I'm guessing it's not like a direct corollary.
No, it's not. I think it's more of like a souvenir-like gift. I think that it depends on the guest. So some people will bring small souvenirs or foods and snacks, right? And so if someone wants to give you a bigger gift, I feel like this is that bigger gift.
Jay used to do that when he used to bring small souvenirs to people, but it was a button that had his face on it.
Still have a bag of these. We won't go down that path.
Let's turn this around before we get too much into Jay and his face buttons. But we do like to start with the history of the founder. I think it's interesting that you are wearing something from Uzbek culture, but let's kind of talk about the history of you and the history of Bek. Can you kind of take us back?
Yeah, absolutely. Originally, I'm from Uzbekistan, and at the time when I was born, Uzbekistan was part of the Soviet Union. So until I was about 9 or 10 years old, I grew up in the Soviet Union, wanting to be. Oh my God, it sounds terrible when I think about it that way. Before I say it, aspiring to grow up to join the Communist Party and thrive in that society. Idolizing the heroes of the Soviet era when I was little in school, and then one summer break, I go to summer camp and then come back to school in September, and then the country's independent, and the Soviet Union split up in 1991, and then it was a very confusing but also a very interesting time for the younger generation, because all the history books started being rewritten, and all the heroes changed to bad guys in history books, and all the bad guys that were told bad guys started becoming good guys in the new history books. So in the 90s, Uzbekistan became independent, so that's where I'm originally from.
That's super fascinating, and I kind of want to dig into that. As a youngster growing up in this, and now your literal history books are changing, how did you navigate that? Was it something where you talked to your parents? What was your path from there?
I don't think my parents or anyone had any clarity whatsoever. I believe it was a very interesting time. So individually, from your perspective as, say, 10-year-old, 10 to 15, that range, you're old enough to understand your surroundings and what's happening, but you're not quite mature enough to fully grasp the challenges that your country or your society are facing. But now looking back, I can clearly understand that all of the countries that split up from the Soviet Union have identified with communism and the Russian culture and the regime that was run from Moscow for nearly a century. And all of a sudden, the countries were scrambling to define their own identities, write their own constitutions, change alphabets and language, and the entire libraries had to be rewritten, not only history books, but also academics. Who are we? What's our identity? How do we revive our identity that we haven't embraced in over a century? And I think that's a monumental task for a team of people who are trying to reignite this new independent nation. So for us, I think it was just confusing. Lots of changes. I think at first it was difficult because everyone was used to things being the same way, and with change in government, the economy was struggling. So it wasn't ideal. A lot of people struggled to make a living and adapt, especially the older generation had a really hard time adapting. And I think for us, it had a minimal impact because at the time, at least for me at that age, you're very sheltered from the outside world by your parents and your family. So the only exposure to that I had was just relearning things in school and adapting to good guys being bad guys and bad guys being good guys. And I think that was it. That was pretty much.
The outside world obviously came to you or you came to it because you're sitting in Kansas City right now. What happened after school? Did you go to college? How did you migrate away from Uzbekistan?
The way I ended up in the US is I came here as an exchange student through State Department. At the time, and I think this program is still active, the State Department was running a program called FLEX, Future Leaders Exchange. FLEX is the brainchild of Senator Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley was a basketball player, played in the NBA, and then a senator. I believe he ran for office in 2000, unsuccessfully, for president. So Senator Bradley had this genius idea to go into all of the newly independent countries and start recruiting young and bright, promising students at a very early age, and to sponsor these students to come spend a year in rural America. In my case, small town Iowa. I think that's as rural as it gets. And in his hypothesis, these students would be exposed to the Western culture and the Western values and the concepts of open society and free open media and speech, democracy. And once these students return to their home countries, the State Department would provide a platform through the local consulates for us to organize, become active, and hopefully instill some of the Western values into our society. And so in 1998, in the 90s, U.S., after the Soviet Union split up, Western culture started creeping in a lot more. So, usually through consumer products, cigarettes, Coca-Cola, and Hollywood movies, and a lot of the popular ones. So the perception of the United States was formed through very popular Hollywood movies. So you can imagine, when I thought of the U.S. in my teens, I wasn't imagining a farm in Iowa. I was imagining New York City, Manhattan, skyscrapers, beautiful people, nice cars, everyone living a glamorous life. And that led a lot of us to aspire to go to the U.S. So when we had this opportunity to compete for this opportunity to become an exchange student, we worked really hard to try to win that scholarship. In the second year of attempting, which was my last year, I had only 2 chances. I was able to win one of those 50 spots that were available. And that's how I first came to the U.S.
What was the weirdest thing about rural Iowa to you? It had to be a bit of a culture shock.
Everything was big. There's no one on the streets, no public trends. So you have to know the context here. Not only have I never ever been to the U.S. before, so I have no idea what to expect except for the Manhattan and big urban cities. I come from a densely populated city. The city where I grew up is one of the most densely populated cities in Central Asia. So there's people on the streets everywhere. There's public trans, and the culture shock in Iowa was empty. There was no one. There's no one on the streets. And everything was big. I think the first 2 things that stood out was the cars, the roads. Everything seemed huge, and it was empty. I think the first week, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in the beginning of a scary horror movie. I felt all the scary movies that I've seen at that point, that's how they start out. Small town, tumbleweeds, like a small high school.
That's wild. What was the name of the city that you grew up in?
Andijan.
And what was the city in Iowa?
So 2 cities. The first one was tiny. It was Truro, Truro, and there's a tiny high school there where I spent my first semester. The high school was called Interstate 35. I don't even remember the mascot. So that was the first town. And the town, Truro, had 1 Phillips gas station where we hung out, and that's it. I think a population of less than 200. And then eventually, for the second semester, I got luckier a little bit, and I moved up to a town of 5,000 called Winterset.
That's wild. So this program that the senator set up to bring individuals from Eastern countries to rural America. I wonder how Truro got selected as one of these cities.
I don't know. One of the things they used to tell us is they would discourage contact with anyone Uzbek or Russian speaking. They wanted to achieve complete assimilation and isolation from any resources. Because in addition to culture shock, you experience a lot of homesickness. And when you're feeling homesick, it's easy to kind of gravitate towards your own people. And that I think they've seen those things happening. And when you do that, you tend to start hanging out and talking to them mostly. Whereas if you're completely isolated, it's a lot easier to assimilate and, adapt.
Who is the they you're speaking to that told you to operate this way?
The secret people. These are so on the ground level. These programs are run by nonprofit organizations. A lot of volunteers, a lot of people, a lot of good, kind-hearted people that kind of empower this network that facilitates, finds families, and helps, with orientation and things like that, and provide guidance to help you be successful during your exchange year.
I kind of want to transition into how you became or started identifying as an entrepreneur. Was that something that kind of threaded through all of this? I mean, it said future leader, you got one of those 50 spots. Was it because you were entrepreneurial? Was it because you were just smart? How did it kind of come about that you wanted to get into an entrepreneurial kind of setting?
I don't think it was a decision. Looking back, I think it was destined to happen. It was a matter of time until I would realize who I truly am, that I'm an entrepreneur. And it took about 20 years since my first entrepreneurial venture to fully start feeling comfortable in my own skin and embracing the fact that I'm an entrepreneur at heart. And looking back at how it all happened, I think I've always been entrepreneurial. As a kid, I ran convenience stores for my uncles. I had side hustles on top of the stores that I ran, and my family enabled that. So I was exposed to entrepreneurship at a very early age. I was making money. I was producing these summer, refreshing juice drinks when I was 8 or 9, and making money every summer. I had my own money at a very early age, which was good and a bad thing because there's not a ton of responsibility at that time. So yeah, I think being exposed to entrepreneurship at an early age was helpful. Just to give you a couple of examples other than convenience stores. So in Andijan, my both parents are physicians, they're doctors, and my mom used to work at this very large clinic with maybe 800 employees. And I discovered this, I was maybe in the 3rd grade at the time. I discovered this green lipstick that applies pink. And it was mind-blowing for me at the time. So I also learned that because I was in this like convenience store circuit at the time, no one else had that. So I started buying that lipstick, and I marked it up double the price, and I started selling it to the doctors in my mom's work. So for 2 months, I got probably half of the hospital or the clinic buying and using that green lipstick that applies pink because it was just a fascinating thing. I was also the first person, I think, in Andijan to introduce access to instant 1-hour photography. And the way I did that was I inherited this camera from someone. I was into photography a lot, but just as a hobby. But one time, this electronic camera, but it still had a film. And I figured out I could make money by taking pictures of kids in kindergartens, like functions. And I figured out that the local photographers were taking 4 to 7 days to develop those photos. And I could do that in 24 hours by traveling to a neighboring city and using their one-hour photo technology that they had at the time. So for a couple of years, I did that, and it became really popular until people started bringing in 1-hour photo technology into the city. So I think it was a natural progression into the entrepreneurship. It was always in my DNA. I can tell you more about how that transition into entrepreneurial adventures when I started growing up. Do you want me to just keep going, or you want to ask me another question?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. And at some point, I'd love to hear how you transitioned from Iowa to now Kansas City. I don't know if that's tied in or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So after spending a year here as an exchange student, I went back to Uzbekistan and I moved to the capital, Tashkent. I started attending university. I started becoming very active with the local community. I started working with organizations like Human Rights Watch, started spreading independent media through Internews. But these initiatives were not very well received with the existing regime. The type of education I was seeking, I was not going to get. And this is very common with a lot of our fellow alumni of this program. A lot of us, 80 or 90% of us, end up going abroad to study it for higher education. So a couple of years later, I came back to the US looking for school. And as I was just roaming around the country looking for universities, I landed at a small liberal arts school just outside of Kansas City called Park University. I fell in love with the faculty and the people that I met there, and I started attending school in Kansas City, which ultimately brought me to Kansas City.
And once you got to Kansas City, you graduated from Park, is that correct?
Yes, I came to Kansas City around 2001, 2002. I think I started Park at 2003. I I was at Park for all of 6 years, I believe, for a long time. Yeah.
The double victory lap.
Yeah. Well, it kept getting, I think, I got a degree in international business first, and then I realized that there's no such profession as international business person. You can't apply for a job to be an international business person. So I went back and got a degree in marketing, which I felt a lot more practical, which at this point, I don't use any one of those because along the way, when I was at school, I kept going back to the entrepreneurial ventures. My first or second year in school, I partnered with two guys and we opened a pizza shop. We ran a pizza shop. We brought a New York style pizza concept to Kansas City, which was very popular, but extremely difficult to run and very time consuming. So a year and a half later, we stopped. And then I had two other businesses while at school in staffing. And that was extremely popular, especially towards the end, towards the end of my school years, towards the end of 2000s, until the recession hit and all the jobs went away, at which point that business failed.
Okay, so talk to me about how and when Super Dispatch became the next business you were working on.
It was random. So after my last business and staffing, and after losing everything I had on that business, we were kind of struggling as a family. So when I was in school, I met a girl, we fell in love, and we got married, and then we started building a family. And after my last business failed around 2008, 2009, we had to move back in with my mother-in-law. And when I was living with her, one of my cousins bought a truck and became a car hauler. Someone convinced him that he could make a lot of money while in school, while attending school and transporting cars. They could make a lot of money. So he went and borrowed some money, bought a truck and trailer, and started transporting cars. And he knew that I was kind of looking for something to do at the time. And he reached out to me one day and said, "Hey, I'm doing this thing, and I think there's an opportunity here because I can't keep my truck full all the time, and I'm invested into this, and I need to figure out a way to make this work and to make more money." So he showed me what he's doing, and I started kind of looking into the industry, and I discovered that a lot of the trucking companies that transport cars have a ton of excess capacity, and the way they're accessing business is not very efficient because they rely on these messaging boards, and it's very manual. So I figured out a way to keep their trucks full through securing high-paying loads and developing processes that gave them access to keeping their trucks full all the time. And 2 months after me collaborating with my cousin, he ended up tripling his revenue. And then he went out and told everyone he was encountering on the road about the setup. So the next 90 days, I had 12 other drivers who I took on as clients who I was dispatching for to keep their trucks full. And they were happy to pay. I was charging 10% of their total revenue to take care of all the administration and to make sure that all they have to worry about is pick up loads and deliver loads. And they always had high-paying loads. Their trucks were always full.
For a visual, is this when I'm driving down the highway and I see a truck that almost looks like a skeleton that just has cars stacked all over it? Is that the type of car hauling you're talking about? Yes,
exactly. Yeah, that's one of the segments of the car hauling. The long haul, they go on those trucks, but they also go on tow trucks. They also go on rail. They also go on containers. They're also sometimes driven by people locally to be transported. But long story short, that's initially how I got into car hauling, and that wasn't Super Dispatch, but that was the beginning of how I got into the space. And then I was building that business for the first 2 years, and we got up to about 7 employees. I had about 40 clients at the time, and the idea was to keep scaling that business, and I became really fascinated and obsessed with this problem. So I was all in, and I was trying to scale it as much as I can. But I kept running into this obstacle of not having deep understanding of the industry and the culture. I was very good at selling our services over the phone for the first 5-10 minutes, but I realized that as we moved up market to larger and larger clients, people wanted a relationship, people wanted a rapport, and people wanted to get to know me and talk about the industry and the culture. And I didn't know the language, I didn't know terminology, I didn't know anything about trucks and trailers, and I didn't have any depth other than the services we provide. And sometimes I would feel like a fraud because, I'm trying to sell a service to this business, and they're genuinely, wanting to have a relationship with us. But beyond our service, I have no idea what I'm talking about. It was apparent to me that I was out of touch. So I wanted to fix that. And in order to fix that, I wanted to go out and spend time on the road. And I called some of the guys that we work with, and I said, hey, I'd like to learn more about what happens on the road. I'd like to learn more about what your day-to-day is like. So can I come along with you on some of your trips? So the next 2 months I spent on the road riding along with different truck drivers. And I'd just be a co-pilot, and I'd just be helping them pickups and drop-offs. I would, stay in motels just like they do, stop at truck stops, eat not so great food, the whole 9 yards.
Did you have any of those gas station rolly hot dogs?
Yeah, everything, man. Pizza, everything fried.
I've been thinking a lot about those gas station rolly hot dogs lately because I think it would be interesting if they had a mileage tracker on them. Like how many miles has this hot dog rolled?
Like
some
a
of those
pedometer.
things have to be like a pedometer for a hot dog that just rolls on a. Like how far is that? I don't know. Sorry.
Does a higher mileage indicate what is it like a freshness indicator?
Yeah, exactly. Like this hot dog is rolled for 5 miles. Don't eat that shit.
Yeah. Like the optimal range where it tastes best and it's best. Yeah.
So you touched on this a little bit, but I'd actually love to hear a typical day in the life of one of these guys on the road. Can you walk me through what a day looks like?
Yeah. Oh my God. These guys are wearing so many hats on the road. It's hard. It's really hard, especially car haulers. They have to coordinate their own trip. So there's a ton of planning to try to figure out where do I go? What do I pick up first? What do I deliver? And then there's art to loading a large car hauling trailer. There's weight balancing. There's the variety of dimensions of cars that have to fit a certain way. To this day, technology and science hasn't been able to automate that piece. It still relies on the human knowledge. So there's a loading piece and origins and destinations. The drivers have to coordinate through phones, their pickups and deliveries. They have to call people. They get incoming 30, 40 phone calls a day of people trying to figure out where they're at, whether something's been done or not. They're constantly running behind. The cars are getting damaged occasionally, more often than they'd like to. They're carrying around stacks and stacks of handwritten paper forms they have to fill out and share. They're constantly chasing a fax machine on the road, trying to get paid or submit paperwork. And at the end of the day, they're trying to reconcile their day and get ready for the next day, all while also dealing with mechanical issues, tires blown out, traffic, people yelling at them. I personally thought a lot of these guys didn't seem, maybe they make really good money, and a lot of them do, but it's a very hard way to make a living. And unfortunately, when you're on the road, you don't have access to a lot of amenities. And I think the truck stops started recognizing that about a decade ago and started investing into like better showers and slightly better food options and things like that. But to this day, it's a very difficult job to be on the road.
When these people are picking up and then dropping off these loads, who are those parties in the arrangement? Are they picking it up from manufacturers and dropping off to dealerships? Are they picking it up from dealerships and dropping off to individuals? Like who are the two sides of that equation?
All of the above, really. Like if you look at the industry and this marketplace, the capacity on both sides, the supply side are the trucking companies and towing companies and these terminals and rail companies. These are the providers and the vendors, and they serve manufacturers, Ford, GM, etc. And then they serve wholesale auto auctions for used cars. They serve dealerships. They serve consumers. So all sorts of players. And as a driver, yeah, you have multiple stakeholders. You have your back office dispatchers and the billing people. You have people at origin. You have people at the destination you have to deal with. And then sometimes you have another entity that's a separate client for that transaction that you have to deal with.
You mentioned earlier that you were doing this whole dispatching service. You had 40 clients, or you went out on the road for 2 months to learn more. But you said that wasn't super dispatch. So what is super dispatch in your own words, and what's the change from you going out on the road to getting to super dispatch?
The story of how super dispatch was born came from the trips that I took with the drivers. Initially, my goal was to learn more about the industry and the culture and to better understand the daily operations of a trucking company that moves cars. But what I ended up stumbling on was a much larger problem. Being in that cabin with a driver, I realized that vehicle shipping was this huge decentralized network of vendors and suppliers and stakeholders and clients in the back office. And this massive network of trucks and customers, they were moving thousands and thousands of vehicles and transactions a day. And the way they were operating was they were still relying on papers and phones and fax machines to connect with one another. And for this highly dynamic, decentralized network of vehicle shippers, it felt like a very outdated way to operate. And I started feeling the pain of the drivers when they started getting phone calls and trying to scramble for paperwork. And it just seemed like these guys were constantly miserable. And sometimes we would get the chance to visit the back office of some of these companies, and you'd walk in and they'd have paperwork everywhere. They'd have everyone typing away, manually entering data everywhere. They'd have stacks and stacks of paperwork, not only on the desks, but the floors would be covered in addition to filing cabinets. None of their systems talk to each other, and the systems usually constituted a spreadsheet of some kind, a spreadsheet. And there's a lot of manual data entry. There's no visibility. There's lots of phone calls. It just seemed like a scene straight out of, I don't know, 60s or the 70s, way before technology was invented. I would encounter hardware like big machines that fold envelopes to send out payments and things like that. So in 2013, this is 2013, in the general technology world, iPhone has been around for 7 or 8 years at the time. And then as consumers, we were accustomed to cloud technologies and, a lot of really cool stuff was happening, but that was not touching transportation. Transportation was not exposed to some of these very basic technological advancements that were commonplace at the time. So I saw that having a lot of critical data trapped on a piece of paper and on individual trucks around the country was a big problem. And lack of visibility was causing major issues for these guys around payments, damages, visibility, tracking, and how they operate as a whole. So when I got back from my last trip at the end of the 2 months to Kansas City, I stumbled upon this workshop. And I know, Jay, you used to run startup weekends, right?
That's right.
So have you guys heard of Lean Startup Machine?
I've heard of the Lean Startup Method. I haven't necessarily heard of the Lean Startup Machine.
So Lean Startup Machine is essentially, yes, it's built around Lean Startup methodology. It's just like Startup Weekend, except there's heavy emphasis on not the idea or the solution, but emphasis on the problem you're solving. And they're heavy on encouraging customer discovery and customer development through talking to your customers to validate your idea or the problem. So I went to one of those workshops and I pitched the problem of trucking companies having a hard time to operate, being inefficient because they rely on paper. So over the next 48 hours, we worked on this problem. And initially my idea was, I thought the problem was paper. I thought, hey, paper is the enemy here. And the problem is inefficiency. But after talking to so many drivers and fleets, what we realized was that paper wasn't the problem. Paper was like the root of a bigger problem. And the bigger problem was payments. Because everything was on paper, people had a really hard time getting paid. Their payments were being delayed by 40 to 60 days because they weren't able to initiate the billing process after they deliver a shipment. So we launched a landing page that basically said, here's an app. It's called Super Dispatch. It will eliminate paperwork and help you get paid faster. And it's $30 a month. This is a non-existent product. It was just a landing page with the concept. So we started circulating that to people that we talked to and their networks and the emails they shared with us. And within 12 hours, we had over $3,000 in real purchases. And we linked that to, I think it was a PayPal account at the time. So people are buying this product. So we had over 100 purchases for a product that didn't even exist yet. It was just an idea. And that was just a mind-blowing experience for us, for the team of four that were on that team at that event. So we won that event. And then that following Monday, I called every single person, apologized for selling him a non-existent product, refunded their money, and made a promise that 6 months later I'd come back and let them have it for free. And that was the biggest catalyst for beginning of Super Dispatch.
How did these 100 people respond to you calling them and saying, by the way, sorry, this didn't exist?
Surprisingly positively. No one was upset. Everyone was getting their money back. And these conversations would actually turn into like 20, 30-minute conversations. And after I finished talking to everyone, I realized that generally these people are happy that there are entrepreneurs out there paying attention to the sector and are looking to solve the problems that can have a very positive impact on their day-to-day and their businesses.
That's awesome. Okay, so you return all their money. You say, I think there's a business here. You had a team of 4. Did that team of 4 from Lean Startup Machine continue to be your team, or did you go off on your own at that point to start building this thing?
No, this is just a workshop. We got together for a workshop. It was just a learning experience for that team. They all had their respective projects or companies. Super Dispatch became a mission for me. First obstacle was I had no idea how to build technology. And I've always built and scaled retail or service businesses. And that's what I knew really well. So I was very comfortable building lifestyle businesses and growing them, but I knew nothing about high growth technology. But what really got me excited and motivated early on was seeing the possibility of scale through technology and how much impact it can have on a large number of people. So I had to go figure out, and basically I had to go find a technical, either co-founder or a technical partner, someone that understands technology. I was definitely the business mind behind the idea. And I started networking. I network everywhere. I went to every single networking event, and literally I'd walk up to anyone wearing a t-shirt and say, hey, are you an engineer? Are you a developer? I have this idea. I want to do this. So eventually I stumbled upon, an engineer that, helped me develop an MVP. A few months later, it wasn't very good. We couldn't make things work, but I kept looking, and I finally got through one of the networking events. I was introduced to the person who is now our CTO.
That's awesome. And even that is no small feat. And I'd love to actually take a short jog here and talk about the Kansas City ecosystem and these events that you're going to and what it felt like being an entrepreneur in that space and looking for technical co-founders, because here, now we do have a lot of technical talent, but we have way too many guys walking around saying, are you an engineer? So I'd love to hear just a little bit deeper on that story, what you experienced in the Kansas City ecosystem.
The community in Kansas City has been a big part of our story. Super Dispatch has had a lot of success over the years of building a company in Kansas City. And hopefully we are on track to be one of the breakout companies that comes out of Kansas City, which is amazing. But as many entrepreneurs understand, it's not one visionary genius hacking away over the weekend in a college dorm room. To building meaningful and exceptional companies takes not only a lot of work and effort, but takes a large group of people. It literally does take a village, not only on your respective team, but also your supporting network around you. And to be honest, I don't know if we would have been where we are today if it wasn't for the community in Kansas City. When I encountered the people, when I kept going to these events and met people, everyone was so willing to contribute their time and explain and teach and share experiences and open up their network to make connections. I learned probably 80% of what I needed to know at the time from the community and for the resources they gave us. I got free scholarships to attend workshops, coffee meetings with highly influential, very successful entrepreneurs for guidance. And then this is around the time Kansas City also started developing resources for early stage entrepreneurs to develop proof of concept. So we were lucky to win a $25,000 grant from an organization called Digital Sandbox, no strings attached, that allowed us to develop our early technology. We were able to also win a competition called Launch KC that awards $50,000 to early stage companies to help grow and scale your companies. So I would say Kansas City, the community has been a big part of the Super Dispatch story and where we are today. And this still happens today. To this day, everyone is so helpful.
So you've been ingrained in Kansas City for 5 years, and that was awesome insight into how Kansas City is treating early stage entrepreneurs. I'm curious, and we'll jump back into Super Dispatch in a second, but what could Kansas City do better?
I think that some things that Kansas City has done really well over the last 5 years. Kansas City has done a great job of initially celebrating entrepreneurship and venture creation, which was great. And then after that, funding was a challenge. And Kansas City is doing an amazing job of creating funding opportunities, developing an investment community right here in Kansas City, exposing these types of deals to, high net worth individuals and creating access to money. So Kansas City is now an amazing place to start and grow an early stage business. Now, if you think in terms of creating truly breakout exceptional companies coming out of Kansas City, now the next phase challenge for us is that, okay, so we got this off the ground. We're real businesses now. Now, how do we make this 10 times or 100 times bigger? Can this ecosystem support that type of growth of those types of companies? And I think the answer is yes. I think what we need to keep doing is we need to keep pushing for the mindset of people to understand what these types of companies are and to allow, for example, in addition to funding, for example, as you're growing, talent is a big challenge. So the young talent coming out of schools and colleges, for them to have a mindset of fully understanding the types of opportunities that startups provide. Startup is not a risk where, it's not, someone in the garage that wants to pay you in beer and hugs for your work. These are legitimate companies and big opportunities for you to build something exceptional. And then I think we have to keep thinking bigger. I think it's important that people that are bold risk takers and visionaries, sharing their stories is very impactful and helpful. There are a lot of amazing companies being built in Kansas City. And sometimes when founders tell their stories, it surprises people. They'll say, oh, I know about this. I've heard about this. Or I read about this. Or I used this. I love this. I didn't know this was in Kansas City. Then the more success we have with these companies, I think it kind of carries that momentum forward. We got that snowball thing going. And I just think we have to double down on that and just keep thinking big, keep attracting, keep telling our stories, and keep pushing. I think keep believing, right? Early on, like I had so many conversations where I was encouraged to leave and move to the coast. I was encouraged to go to San Francisco or Austin, and the funds that wanted to invest in us early on, there were companies that wanted to buy us. They wanted us to move and become part of them, and the answer was no. That it wasn't necessary, and this idea that it can't be done here is just false. So I think we just have to prove that through our actions and show that breakout companies are being built and can be built in the Midwest. There's some indexes now about how much money is being raised in Kansas City, which is a very positive indicator. But the Techstars Accelerator has been present in Kansas City for about 4 years. And there were 0 Kansas City companies in Techstars for the first 2 years. And we were the first Techstars company from Kansas City to be accepted into that program. Since we went through the program in the last 2 years, there are now over a dozen Kansas City startups that went through Techstars, 500 startups in Y Combinator, which is a great sign.
So I want Jay to ask some questions about the product and how Super Dispatch sits today. But first, I wanted to touch on this idea of a big opportunity. So how big is the market for Super Dispatch? How big is this idea? Is it just car haulers? Is it beyond that?
When we look at the market size, we first focus on the U.S. market. And the vehicle shipping market in the U.S. alone is $12 billion in annual revenues. As far as volume of transactions, there are estimated 80 million vehicle moves a year in the U.S. And the participants in these transactions so this marketplace is the people on two sides are shippers and carriers. So looking at this opportunity, we look at how every single vehicle is being moved, whether it's coming off of an assembly line and being distributed to dealerships, or whether these are used vehicles being exchanged between dealers and auctions or individual consumers. And we look at the total number of transactions, the total number of moves, and that's the biggest opportunity for us to try to digitize and streamline every single transaction, every single vehicle shipping transaction in the U.S.
You said 80 million. Is that 80 million vehicles that are moved or 80 million transactions?
80 million moves. Yeah, actually, we don't know. There's very limited data on volume of shipments. There's only one source for total revenues on overall trucking and a vehicle shipping segment. So all the data that we do know to this day in the U.S. market alone is that 12 billion in revenue is a total amount of revenue that the trucking companies are collecting, not including the any margins that brokerages, for example, make, the middlemen in the space. And then we know that this network moves they have about 80 million moves a year. And then capacity-wise, so far, we've been able to identify that there are at least about 30,000 large trucks or assets that move cars. Those big trucks you were referring to. We haven't yet mapped out some of the other segments of the capacity. We still don't know exactly how many towing trucks engage in vehicle moves. We've been able to identify that about 15 million of the 80 million moves are new cars and about 65 million are used cars. We know that at least 5 to 10 million of those new cars are likely to initially go through rail companies and then be distributed through trucks. But what we still don't know is we don't know how many towing companies engage in vehicle shipping and how many cars are being moved by people. There's a segment called drive away where a lot of local moves are facilitated by people actually, driving the cars from A to B.
I heard you speak in one interview that most of these trucking companies are small businesses, have somewhere close to 20 trucks. Was I hearing that right? Of these 30,000 trucks, that move cars, is that highly fragmented?
Yes, they are. So one asterisk to 30,000 is, another thing that's unknown right now is 30,000 are these big trucks. Then there are the smaller ones that can transport 1, 2, 3 cars. So these are small dually pickup trucks with a small trailer behind them. We have no way of tracking those. So we believe that there are additional units moving cars, but they're not being tracked the same way. So we don't know how many of those assets are out there. But when you look at the market segmentation, it actually applies evenly to all the trucking verticals. So if you look at the trucking industry overall, the entire industry is made up of small businesses. And the general numbers are, of the 100% trucking capacity, 96% have 20 or less trucks. 90% of them have 6 or less. And 31% are a segment of what's called owner-operators. So usually just one truck.
And to this point, I think I saw in a different article, maybe it was a Startland piece, that you guys had worked with about 5,000 carriers to this point. Which segment do they fall into what you just laid out? Is it a lot of owner-operators? Is it a lot of these 20 truck companies?
Yeah. Well, if you look at the Super Dispatch network of carriers exclusively, there are now about 7,000 total trucks on the road relying on Super Dispatch every day. And about 2,000 of those are owner-operators for us. The remaining 5,000 trucks belong to fleets. And the fleet is a very loosely used term for us internally. It's basically any company with 2 or more trucks. But when you break down our customer base, it is heavily owner-operators and small to mid-sized businesses because of just the nature of how the market breaks down. But we go up anywhere from 1 truck to, we have a client with 350 trucks. But there just aren't that many companies with 350 trucks out there.
I might have just missed this, but you initially set up the landing page and you said $30 per month. Is that still the model? Is it a monthly subscription or is it a per transaction? How does that work for you guys now?
Yeah, it's a basic SaaS model. It's by subscription. We've experimented with pricing a lot. We continue to experiment with it. Currently, we charge per truck. So we measure the size of the company by the number of trucks they have, active trucks, and we charge $50 per active truck.
$50 per month, right?
Yes, per month.
What do they get for that $50 per month?
The value proposition for the trucking company is not only to eliminate paperwork and get paid faster, it's evolved to be one centralized system where a company can manage all their affairs. They can manage all their loads, all their drivers, all their tracking, all their documents, and all of their billing and payments all in one platform. And for an individual owner operator, so one individual person on the road, our mobile app is their entire back office in their back pocket. Every big checkbox that they need to check is checked within one mobile device. So for example, it's completely paperless and digital. It allows them to generate electronic bill of ladings. It allows them to conduct inspections of the vehicles at pickup and delivery, collect digital signatures. It allows this driver to electronically share these documents with all the stakeholders in real time. And the most popular feature in the mobile app is for the owner operators is the ability to invoice a load in real time the moment it's delivered. So the days and weeks of delays that they used to face, they no longer have to deal with, because with the push of a button, they can start invoicing and getting paid for the loads that they deliver in real time.
What's novel about that? At one point you said there was like chasing faxes. When they push that button, does that send an email with the invoice to the destination that they can pay through some interface? Or how does that work from a product perspective?
It accelerates the amount of time it takes to convert a delivery confirmation into an invoice. So normally you'd have a piece of paper with a signature on it, and you'd have to generate an invoice and send it to the customer. In Super Dispatch, we know who the customer is, we know all the terms of the agreement. So the moment it's delivered, we electronically generate the invoice and send it out. So something that would take for them, 3 to 5 or 7 days to initiate happens instantly when they deliver the load.
So there are a lot of benefits on time savings. I'm curious, how much so right now it's $50 per truck. So over 12 months, an owner operator is going to pay $600. How much did it cost an owner operator before Super Dispatch to do all of the same things that you just listed out? An estimate.
We actually don't charge owner operators. The owner operators get to use the app for free. We only monetize fleets. So last summer, we made a decision to introduce a freemium model. At the time, we were charging $15 for owner operators, and we were charging a different fee from the fleets. So we made a decision to allow owner operators to start using our app for free, because these are just individuals that are trying to get off the ground, and we wanted to enable them to get better tools and be more successful so that they grow and add more trucks. And once you add your second truck to your business, then we start monetizing. So you're looking at the Super Dispatch network, the 2,000 owner operators that are using our platform. If they're only using the mobile app, they're not being charged for that service. Only when you start using the back office transportation management system and start adding trucks to it, which has a lot more value, then we start monetizing it.
So my same question kind of stands for fleets then. How much does it cost to do all of the things that Super Dispatch does without using Super Dispatch in the traditional way, having a back office and everything?
The last time we calculated, they're saving on average $8,200 by using Super Dispatch. And what goes into that is the amount of time that it takes, the delays, the amount of time it takes to process each step in the life cycle of the shipment, manually process all that. So we take like average payrolls and the time savings into consideration. So Super $600 a month is the cost of annual cost of per truck, and the companies are saving $8,200 per truck by using Super Dispatch versus not. So I guess you could say that, to answer your question more exactly, it'd be like $7,600.
Have you gotten feedback from these owner operators that more of them are transcending from being a single truck owner operator into having more trucks because of this system?
There's no exact evidence of that. There's anecdotal evidence that a lot of them start out with one truck. And then as things progress and as I start landing more and more customers, people that are interested in growing or establishing a business, they'll start growing.
I'm curious, any other anecdotal evidence from your customers, what they say? Obviously, it seems like the time savings and being able to invoice quickly is their highest used feature. Is there anything else that they tell you that might be surprising about what they like about Super Dispatch?
Yeah, so if you look at fleets have multiple stakeholders. So in the fleet, you have drivers, but you also have dispatchers and accountants managing aspects of the back office. And what people love about Super Dispatch, when you read reviews or when they talk to us about how they're using the product, they like that everything is in one place. So there's very minimal manual data entry. So they're able to manage all the orders coming in, and they don't have to call their drivers as much. They don't have to track their shipments. 30, 40 phone calls they were doing, they no longer have to do. They no longer have to print out the order sheets or rate agreements. And the invoicing is also streamlined. So for example, the transportation management system talks to QuickBooks and streamlines that piece. So I think what it did for them is that when I first visited the offices, the office was very operated in silos. Dispatching was a separate system, accounting was a system, and they were connected through manual data entry or human communication or through paper. And we've combined all the dispatch functions and billing functions and compliance functions. And really, at a high level, if you look at the core problems that Super Dispatch has solved for them, there's really 4 key events that happen in the shipping of a car. First thing that has to happen is the shipper and the carrier have to connect. So the customer, somebody needs to ship a car. whether it's a direct shipper or manufacturer or broker, they need to find a trucking company. So that's the first problem that we've solved. Then there's a big need for visibility. So you need to be able to see where everything is and how it's progressing without having to track people down through phone and text messages. Then the third key piece is proof of delivery, which we've completely digitized and made in real time. This is that piece of paper that with a signature that triggers payment. Imagine owner-operator doesn't have as big of a problem with this, but if you're a fleet moving thousands of cars a month, then you can have a serious problem with inability to bill for those cars on time. So we've digitized proof of delivery and initiated payment, which is the last piece of that life cycle. So what Super Dispatch has done is that before Super Dispatch, customers were solving these four key problems through lots of manual and decentralized ways and multiple tools. And Super Dispatch has brought all of those things into one platform and simplified the entire process.
The Startline piece I read, which was from January of this year, mentioned you had 19 full-time employees. Is that number still holding steady?
I'm happy to share all of the KPIs with you transparently. So the team-wise, the headcount, there are about 40 people now working on Super Dispatch. 12 of us are based in Kansas City. Those are mostly business units. And then we have an engineering team of 26 people in Tashkent, Uzbekistan. And then we have a few developers in Eastern Europe also.
So let's dive into those KPIs that Jay just mentioned. What KPIs do you guys pay attention to most in your business?
We obviously track revenue. We obviously track revenue growth. For us, revenue is monthly recurring revenue. We track new MRR monthly, and we track growth rate. We track expansion and contraction of revenue from the existing customer base. And then we track churn, gross churn, and net revenue churn. Outside of revenue, the KPIs that we pay attention to have to do with growth, marketing and sales, just number of leads coming in, deal sources, conversion rates on sales. Then on product side, the key KPIs for product side are number of vehicles being delivered. We track how many vehicles are we delivering each week, each month, each year, and whether that's trending in the right direction that we'd like it to. We track the number of photos being taken by drivers on the road of the cars. We track number of invoices being generated and the total volume of transactions on the platform. And then we also pay a lot of attention to support and success KPIs. One of the reasons that the industry has really embraced Super Dispatch and became really popular in this space is people found the product to be simple, but what they realized is that because we, as a product-driven company rooted in lean startup methodology, we naturally pay a lot of attention to customers. So early on, people started seeing their feedback being directly implemented into the product. So there's this now notion in the industry that, we listen to what customers say and we bake it into the product. It's driven by them. It's not just these crazy ideas we're coming up with. As a part of that, customer support is very important for us. So we're known for having exceptional customer support. So we use Intercom for chat. We have chat and phone support. So we track number of conversations coming in, time to respond to a conversation. There's a happy index. That's a percentage. It's like an NPS score. Yeah. And then we track on churn, we track, how long it takes for somebody, basically the lifetime value of a customer and how long it takes for them to churn.
So you guys have a lot of numbers that you track, and that's awesome. I think it would be beneficial to kind of just run through and maybe we do like a rapid fire kind of round here where we just get some of the numbers and then Jay and I can ask follow-up questions based on those, or we can dive down the rabbit hole. Who knows what's going to happen here? What do you say?
Okay, let's try it.
All right. So revenue growth rate, what's that look like?
Month over month, we've been averaging about 6 to 8% month over month growth.
Okay. What about churn?
Churn. So for a long time, we weren't tracking net churn. So we're tracking gross revenue churn. And churn until this year would fluctuate between 3 to 4%. And then this year, we've modified our KPIs to start calculating net revenue churn. So to adjust it for the difference in expansion and contraction from the existing customers. And currently, we're between 1.48 and 1.56% net revenue churn.
Cool. How about your marketing conversion rates?
Our marketing conversion rates aren't very strong, mostly because we've had very limited marketing efforts. The KPIs that I do know on the marketing funnels are, to this day, 80% of our leads still come through word of mouth. And the most successful, campaigns we've run in the past on marketing have been email campaigns and content. So I think on email campaigns, like compared to any other email campaigns I used to run, like Super Dispatch actually gets better numbers. So I think we have about 21 to 24% open rates on our email campaigns. And then we'll have 2 to 3% click-through rates, depending on content. So email campaigns are very effective channels, and we track that. Recently, in August, we finally started tracking number of campaigns. We used to not track that. And then we're now also testing Facebook as a channel. I don't have the exact data yet, but we're beginning to try to test that channel, but I don't have KPIs around it.
Okay. On the product side, number of vehicles delivered?
Do you also want to know like the sales KPIs of like the leads coming through, or is that a separate question? Were you asking for like overall growth KPIs or just marketing?
Yeah.
Okay. So on conversion rates, I can tell you one thing that kind of helped us with growth early on was another KPI worth mentioning that doesn't touch on revenues, but on conversion rates. We saw early on that if we got somebody into a demo, there was a high likelihood, and we started tracking that in 2016, and we started averaging a 70% conversion from demo to customer. And then this year on the conversion, again, the leads that are coming into marketing, we're also know now that about 60% of deals coming in convert to prospects, and then 30% of those deals end up becoming customers. So overall, I think that's about 20% average conversion rate that we're getting from the inbound leads that are coming in, which is all that we have now.
Cool. And you mentioned one KPI on the product side, that's the amount of invoices, and it's kind of like a gross merchandise value KPI. Is that something you track or you have a number on?
Yeah, I do. Right now, actually, the gross merchandise value is not identical to the invoices being sent out because some of the shipments pay on pickup or delivery in cash or check. So some of the transactions, maybe about a third of the transactions, do not generate an invoice.
Okay. So this invoice number is going to be a little bit less than your gross merchandise value, but what would that KPI look like?
The invoices, we are right now into 20 to 25 million a month in gross amount of invoices being generated.
And then you mentioned, well, this will be the last one we touch on, but this idea of a happy index. Can you talk about that a little bit more? And what's that out of? What's that ranked on? And then what's your current score?
We track that weekly now. Last week's score is 96. It's usually in the 90s, but it's really not a good indicator. It's not because it comes from Intercom Analytics, and it measures people that actually react with a smiley, flat face, neutral, or angry face to your interaction. And like it's 1 week you can have only like 2 people react, and the other week you'll have 20 people react. So the percentage number is not a good indicator. If you really wanted to see how well we're doing with customer support, we can look at the happy index over time. I think like that's maybe like a good indicator. But really, our ability to respond to them, like we track number of calls we make and number of calls we miss. So really, like when I want to know, are we doing a good job in support and are people happy? I look at how long is it taking for us to respond to a conversation in a chat setting, and then how many calls are we missing? So we miss on average maybe 30% of the incoming calls that we get on support and sales. So we try to reduce those numbers, like get back to them quicker and make sure that we're not missing calls and when people are calling us.
What's your goal on that 30% number of calls being missed? Where do you want that to be?
0.
Okay. Good.
I have a couple real quick questions that are getting away from KPIs. So Eric, did you touch on all of that?
I think we're good.
Amazing. One, you mentioned that you had 26 engineers in Uzbekistan, which when I talk to teams who are hiring offshore technical talent, that's not the first country they go to. Obviously, you have a tie in there. Is that something that's personal to you? Is that mission driven in any way?
There are definitely key ingredients that made that formula work. Things become common for entrepreneurs to have nightmare stories of interacting with freelancers or remote workers or dev shops overseas. We actually we looked at some other companies who have successfully deployed remote teams and integrated them into their organizations. And the common denominators usually are at the leadership level, people responsible for the technical teams, offshore teams, usually speak the language and know the culture, which is the case, which in our case, we speak the language, we have an existing network in that country, and we understand the culture. So establishing trust is a lot easier. And then early on, we started investing in creating sort of like this bridge between the teams. So we spend a lot of time traveling back and forth. And especially for the engineers over there, we spent 2 or 3 times a year. We like them to come in, spend some time with the customers in Kansas City or in the US or attend conferences and collaborate with the teams in Kansas City. So I'd say like having a cultural connection and knowing the language and being able to build trust. And the third thing that we work very hard at is it's a super dispatch company, legally, officially, and culture-wise. Whenever we think of us as a team, we don't separate. We just look at this is the Kansas City team, this is the Tashkent team, and this is the remote team. And all the cultural aspects, our manifesto and our core values extend to both offices.
This is awesome. Looking forward, is there anything holding you guys back, or what's holding you guys back? And what does the future look like? Do you expand past car hauling? I know that the logistics space in general is huge. I don't know if this applies to a bigger piece of the pie out there. I'm just curious what you're looking at down the road.
Yeah, there are two potential opportunities for us that we're excited about. Right now, we're very focused on delivering a solution for the vehicle shipping industry. We want Super Dispatch to become this complete end-to-end transportation solution for vehicle shipping for all of the stakeholders, not just the trucking companies, but also the other segments of that capacity, other companies that are moving cars, not on trucks. Then we also want to make it easier for the shipping side, the brokerages and the shippers and the manufacturers to be able to tap into that carrier capacity and streamline how cars get moved all together to digitize this entire supply chain all in one platform. That's a really exciting opportunity that we're executing against, and we're very well positioned right now to deliver that to this industry. When we look beyond that, Canada kind of organically happened. We're now in Canada. We have a strong presence there. We're also a leading transportation management service provider in Canada as well. That led us down the path of staying inside automotive logistics space, but expanding globally. So we've started engaging with some incumbents and existing players in Europe and Asia, and we're beginning to study their existing supply chain and distribution networks and how we might be able to help them digitize and tap into that. So one large opportunity that I can't yet quantify, but maybe if we have another catch up a year from now, I could have some numbers around market size and opportunity size around geographical expansion. And this wouldn't happen till late last year because we're very focused on the US market right now. But another opportunity that's kind of exciting and interesting, but I don't know if it's just a shiny object opportunity or it's a legitimate opportunity, is expanding into other modes of freight. You know, cars aren't the only things being moved on the road, and we are amazing at handling specialized freight. So anything that doesn't come in a box or a pallet, our platform is freight agnostic. It does a great job of managing other types of freight. But really, I think it's a balance of like, what are we really good at? Where do we want to stay focused at? We now know that we can't be everything to everyone, but whatever we decide to do, we really want to be best at it. And right now, it's automotive logistics.
One of our past podcast guests just recently gave me this phrase, Jeff from Mobius, a little shout out there, vision with a focus. And I think that's what you guys have. It's awesome. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Where can people find out more about you and Super Dispatch?
I'd be happy to engage with any existing or potential customers or any entrepreneurs or anyone who wants to talk to us or learn about us. Superdispatch.com is our website. There's a chat icon. We get requests and inquiries through there all the time. I'm also happy to receive any emails at Bek, B-E-K, at superdispatch.com.
Amazing. Thanks for being on the show, Bek.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me, and keep building. I love the work you guys are doing.
All right, Eric, we just spoke with Bek of Super Dispatch. Right now, we're going to get into one of our favorite parts of these episodes, our deal memo, talking about this opportunity, talking about Bek as a founder. What stuck out to you? Anywhere you want to start?
Yeah, I think we should start with the founder. I think Bek was an incredibly interesting person. Definitely one of the most unique stories we've had on the podcast thus far. He grew up idolizing communist leaders and wanting to be part of the Communist Party. Now he's in the midst of what is perhaps the most capitalist thing in the world, which is starting a company. So I think that his story is incredible, and he offers a lot of insights from that story. What do you think?
Yeah, I love this interview. I thought he was incredibly generous, sharing a lot of his perspective and speaking about his background in a level of depth that he didn't have to. It is a very, very unique story, which I love, and I think is really fundamental to who he is and what kind of entrepreneur that he is. I love that he told a story of all of the things he had done entrepreneurial up to this point, from selling lipstick that applied a different color to figuring out kind of this 1 hour photo hustle, going to different cities, to starting a New York style pizza shack. It just seemed that his mind works in such a way that he's going to find opportunity and ways to solve problems or problems to solve. And I really, really appreciated that. But his whole story going from Uzbekistan to America and being in Truro, Iowa, going to a high school that's named after a interstate, bizarre, awesome story, and then back again to Kansas City to start the service company that became Super Dispatch. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the interviews that I think I've enjoyed the most, which is a bold claim. And I really believe in Bek as a founder, given all that he shared with us.
Same. And I think it's not just the story, but the way he thinks about these things. I love that even before he went through the, what was it called? Lean Machine Boot Camp.
Lean Startup Machine.
Lean Startup Machine Boot Camp, Lean Startup Machine Program. He kind of had that methodology kind of almost embodied into him, where it was like, okay, there's demand here. Here's a problem. Let's solve it, and we'll do it in an optimal way. So I really like that. I think that it's sometimes tough to teach people certain things if they don't get it organically, and Bek definitely like gets it. I mean, he was always starting lifestyle businesses, service style businesses, and now he gets to apply that same kind of methodology to a tech business which scales, which is awesome from a capital allocation standpoint.
Totally agree. Something that we've talked about on the show before is this statistic from CB Insights that 42% of companies fail because of a lack of market need. And it seems like everything he's ever done has been born out of a genuine need that he found. And I don't want to understate how rare and important it is for somebody to take such a customer-centric approach and go straight to customers and hear from them and talk to them so much. I mean, yeah, there's a story of starting a landing page and selling $3,000 worth of orders for something that didn't exist. But even more impressive than that in my mind was the story of then calling all 100 of those customers the next Monday and having personal conversations with them to return the money and learn more about their problems. I think that is where you find companies that really solve a real problem. You know, he spoke to, it wasn't a paper problem, it was a payments problem. We found that all of them were having trouble getting payments in on time, and it was hurting the way that they could do business. And I think that's really, really important going forward, just his willingness to talk to the customer.
And not only just talk to them, but really like dive into their life. He spent 2 months on the road to really understand this problem. He said, okay, look, I have this dispatching business, it's doing great, but I want to spend 2 months on the road and really understand what the problem is.
And it wasn't because he was necessarily missing or flailing around with the problem. The business was operating well. It was, these people want to form a relationship. I'm recognizing that I don't have the context and the background that I need. I'm going to go get that. And just did that willingly. I love that.
So I think it's safe to say that we are sold on Bek as a founder. What do you think about the market size of this opportunity?
The easy answer is to say $700 billion is a huge, huge market size. And that's certainly true. The segment he's going after is less than $700 billion, I'm sure. But in my mind, it's still a very, very big market. He's focused on haulers right now, but he recognized that his software is sort of load agnostic and that he can serve the trucking industry from all different points of view and from all different angles. And I think that is something that he can grow into. So I think that the market size seemed rather large, pretty large. If you had a shadow there or something that I'm missing, let me know.
I don't. I think that it does seem like a large market size. I think that their model's unique in that we come across this problem all the time, actually, Jay. Let's step back and just kind of think about this. Whenever people quote us market sizes, they always quote it in whatever the traditional market size is, right?
What do you mean?
So if I said, okay, what's the market size for haulers? And it's, call it $1 million. I know that's not the actual number. But then my product comes in and does it cheaper. The actual market size for my product, say it's 50%, is now $500,000, not $1 million.
Yes.
And we see that all the time with founders saying, oh, we come in at a 33% discount, or we come in at a 80% discount, and our market size is $4 billion. And I don't know that that's exactly the case. And I think that's why you and I like bottoms-up analysis more than top-down.
Yeah, so he gave us some numbers here. He calculated that Super Dispatch saves all of their haulers, what was it, $7,500 a year on average?
I had 8,200.
Yeah, he definitely mentioned 8,200 as saving them, but then it had a cost. Or maybe the cost was higher than that, and it was 8,200 was the bottom line. Either way, yeah, so he was talking about the value of Super Dispatch being in cost savings versus any additional revenue. So did you do some math to figure out what his market size would be, taking that in mind?
Yeah, so my understanding is that they have a SaaS model, which is $50 a month on a per truck basis. That's the basis of how they make money. They don't charge owner operators, and they do charge fleets. So my biggest question is, how many trucks are in fleets across the United States? Do you know that number?
I believe there are 30,000 large trucks that move cars. I had a 30,000 number, but I don't have any more context behind that. I know that a fair percentage of them are owner operators. Looks like 31% are owner operators. So approximately 10,000.
So let's say that there's 20,000 trucks in the United States that move cars on a monthly basis. That means 20,000 times $50. That's $1 million per month. So you're looking at $12 million in potential revenue per month at the current price point, just for fleets, if they continue with their methodology of not charging owner operators and continue with the same price point. That seems low to me. It seems like I'm missing something.
And it might be that my numbers are off.
Yeah, in the interview, Bek told us that there are about 30,000 large trucks. And he mentioned that there was a asterisk on that number because they didn't know how many smaller trucks there are, trucks that haul 1 to 3 cars. So if we take that number and then we look at some research done via IBIS World, in the United States, there are approximately 54,000 people employed in the auto/vehicle shipping services industry. So somewhere in that 30 to 50,000 is probably the number of trucks out there.
Okay.
Let's call it 40,000, just for our math here. The model that Bek has in place and the model that Super Dispatch has in place is that owner-operators are free and fleets pay $50 per truck. Now, you had a stat that said what percentage of the market is owner-operators. What number was that?
31%.
Okay, so 30% of our 40,000 is 12,000, which gives us 28,000 that would be applicable to fleets and billable at the $50 rate. Let's just call that 30,000 to make things simple. That's 1.5 million per month or 18 million per year. That number seems a little small to me, Jay. What do you think?
Yeah, that's good math. So you're saying that if he had 100% saturation in the trucks that are monetized and exist, Super Dispatch would be generating $18 million per year on that line of business.
Right, that's my understanding based on the numbers that were provided to us.
Got it. Yeah, that does seem a little small. And I think that math is fair. He mentioned right now that, he mentioned that, one, they are playing with pricing. They have been playing with pricing. So $50 per month may increase over time. It may also be that he's trying to move into this per transaction type model. He talked about there are 80 million vehicle moves in the United States, which is essentially the number of transactions in the United States per year on these types of vehicles. So I agree, $18 million per year is probably too small of an opportunity for a large fund to get excited about. But if the price is going to change, or if he's changing his model, or if he's branching into other groups within the trucking industry that aren't just car haulers, I think there's probably some upside there. But you're right, if it was based solely on the current model at the current price point for the current market, it does seem a little small.
That being said, I think that there's something that is really interesting about this. So he said they have 5,000 trucks that are in fleets right now, which means we just calculated 28,000 exist in fleets, called 30,000, means he has a 17% market share right now. That's pretty crazy. That's probably the most saturation we've seen on the Upside podcast.
Yeah, and it's only been a few years in business, and I know that their revenue has grown very quickly over the last couple of years, which is a good sign. And it makes sense. I think that for this product and this type of user, Super Dispatch has really found product market fit. And that's why Bek can give us all kinds of metrics and KPIs, because they understand who the product is for, what it's doing for them, and they can kind of drill down on what is working to get to them and what is not. And so I think that's really promising.
And going to your point about, potential maybe add-on features or expanding, if you can get 80-90% of this market, you essentially have a captive audience to launch whatever additional features you want and grow that potential revenue because you understand the industry holistically. So becoming ubiquitous throughout an industry definitely has its advantages for future pricing power as well.
Yeah, and you know what? I have a number here actually that he gave us, that the vehicle shipping market in the US is $12 billion. Something all of this is assuming, all of these numbers that we've just given are United States numbers. And he also mentioned that through no actual effort, they're now in Canada. So market size internationally also expands the pie a little bit, but we don't have those numbers, so it's hard to make a ruling on those numbers. But I think is safe to say is that from this conversation, if we were looking at Super Dispatch as an opportunity that we were interested in as investors, it would certainly spawn another conversation where we'd probably drill down into some of these specifics. Is there anything that we didn't get from the interview that you were looking for, Eric?
So following on a conversation that we had in a VC mashup episode with Ross Baird, which published in mid-October, I think that going forward, I want to do a better job of asking why you're fundraising, specifically to the founder, or why might you be fundraising? This opportunity seems like they're doing great on paper. The financials seem good. The traction seems great. They have a good understanding of their KPIs. They're continuing to develop their KPIs, but everything seems very healthy. And I'm curious what additional money would be used for here, and if selling a portion of the company is worth it, or if grinding it out is just worth it. And that's something that I think we could do a better job of asking about in general to get a sense of where this business is going. I think I would have liked to get some feedback from a car hauler or a vehicle shipper. I know that Bek has gotten a ton of feedback and we took him at his word for it, but I didn't really understand this industry coming in. As you could probably tell from the intro, I kind of misunderstood the idea as well. I think it would have been very helpful to go out and do a little research of my own and call a car hauler to understand this problem and this space a little bit more. So it's not something that we didn't get from Bek so much as something that I think I could have done a better job of.
And something that I felt like I didn't ask, that we historically haven't asked a whole lot, that we probably should, more questions about their team. He gave us some statistics about how many employees they have locally and how many engineers they have remotely in Uzbekistan and otherwise. And so he gave us a little bit about their headcount and the breakdown of that team. I would love to hear more about some of the specifics of the leadership team and their skill sets, because if we're looking at this as an opportunity, and this is something that came out of that episode with Ross, if we're looking at this opportunity, we're not just investing solely in the founder, we're looking at the team holistically. So moving forward with all of the founders we talk to, I think we could do a better job of talking about their entire team and what they bring to the table.
Definitely. So Jay, as we look forward at the Super Dispatch opportunity, what are you looking for in the next 6 to 18 months from Bek and Super Dispatch?
I think this is pretty straightforward, and it's likely what you're going to say too. I'm looking to see, are they continue to saturate that market that they're already in? How much penetration do they have in the US car hauling market? And second, are they, one, either branching into other verticals as well, two, moving internationally to expand the market size, or three, experimenting with the pricing model to expand that market size as well?
Yeah, well, you took 3 answers there. So, of course, I was going to repeat one of them. I would say that the thing that I'm most curious about is their current price point. And the reason for that is if they can exhibit some pricing power, it means that they have high enough saturation and there is a unique enough benefit to being on Super Dispatch that, there's even the possibility that this becomes like industry standard, in which case pricing power just soars. I think the price is going to dictate a lot going forward because there is a lot of room in that $8,200 of cash savings to capture a little bit more of that consumer surplus. And I think that price and what we learn about that price over the next 6 to 18 months and see, does it grow? Does it stay the same? Why does it grow or stay the same? Is going to tell us a lot.
Yep, I'm with you. Awesome conversation. A lot of fun. Really interesting international history lesson we had here. So guys, we'd love to hear your thoughts. You can tweet at us at UpsideFM. Let us know anything we missed, anything that you disagree with, anything that came to mind for you listening to this interview, and comment on Breaker if you'd like. Right on this episode, we'll see your comment there and we can talk with you there. If you have a guest that you think would be good for our show, you can email us hello@upside.fm. Otherwise, we'll talk to you next week.
Later.
That's all for this week. Thanks for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's guest, so shoot us an email at hello@upside.fm or find us on Twitter @UpsideFM. We'll be back here next week at the same time talking to another founder in our quest to find upside outside of Silicon Valley. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please email us or find us on Twitter and let us know. And if you love our show, please leave us a review on iTunes. That goes a long way in helping us spread the word and continue to help bring high-quality guests to the show. Eric and I decided there were a couple things we wanted to share with you at the end of the podcast, and so here we go. Eric Hornung and Jay Klaus are the founding parties of the Upside podcast. At the time of this recording, we do not own equity or other financial interest in the companies which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own opinion and do not reflect the opinions of Duff & Phelps LLC and its affiliates, Unreal Collective LLC and its affiliates, or any entity which employ us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. We have not considered your specific financial situation nor provided any investment advice on this show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.
Never mind, bro, that can't be matched. I'm lighting it on fire, used to run victory laps, and still I'm not even tired. It's all about the timing, yeah, that's what they say. Well, I'ma keep on rhyming, find a way and get it.